Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot.
And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Adam Sachs. He is the CEO and co-founder of Vicarious Surgical. Adam, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So, as I do always, tell us a little bit about your background and your journey to this point and this company and setting this up.
So I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I studied at MIT and focused primarily on biomedical engineering and robotics while I was studying there. And MIT is also where I met my co-founder, Sami Khalifa, who's now our CTO. And Sami and I were working on this project as a side project with our third co-founder, Dr. Barry Green, who's an experienced laparoscopic and general surgeon. We were working through a number of the challenges with minimally invasive surgery today, with robotics today. Frankly, listening to Dr. Green talk about his frustrations with the state of existing tools and the state of existing surgical robots, how challenging they are to learn and to use, and looking toward making something better. And that's really where this all came from. At some point, somewhere around there, we were working on this project and we saw that movie that you and I were just talking about, the Fantastic Voyage. And we were actually, I had seen it previously, but I kind of introduced this concept to them. And we were really kind of inspired by this idea that we could shrink the surgeon down and put them inside of the patient. And that, combined with the Oculus Rift Kickstarter, really got us thinking and onto this track of using our own design of surgical robotics that we had come up with to create a miniature little human surgeon robot that goes into the patient through one small incision. And a lot of technical challenges that I'm kind of breezing over in that we've solved along the way, but that's really where it all started.
So I've got to say, you're grabbing people's attention. Well, at least you're grabbing mine when you say, well, we saw the Fantastic Voyage and thought, hey, we could do that. And I'm sure people are going, wow, this is really interesting. So let's boil this down a little bit. You have sort of talked about some of the challenges. So, we've got regular surgery that takes place in the typical field. Then you've got this minimally invasive through different access ports, and we've also got robotic surgery, which is a whole additional layer on top of both of those. And you're now coming in to do something slightly different. So help us understand and describe a little bit of what it is that you do.
Yeah, if I can actually back up and even talk a little bit about those, the existing systems, open laparoscopic and existing robots, I think it helps give some of the context for what we're doing. So open surgery is really, obviously, as you know, the kind of the classic way of performing an operation. You open up the patient with a scalpel, and the surgeon can use their own hands, they can see with their own eyes, but the incision itself, to gain access to the abdominal cavity, it's actually what causes most of the injury to the patient. Almost 20% of open abdominal surgical patients have a failure of their incision to heal correctly that results in the need for additional surgery. So that's what minimally invasive surgery is all about. The idea that having 3 to 5, sometimes more, small incisions can vastly reduce the injury to the patient at the cost of vastly increased complexity for the surgeon. What it's essentially doing is forcing the surgeon to operate from the outside in, across the abdominal wall with long, slender instruments and a camera that is controlled by their surgical assistant. Surgical robots that exist today add some wrists on the end of those instruments, but still the fundamental challenge remains, which is that with existing multi-port surgical robots, as well as with multi-port non-robotic surgical technique, the surgeon actually has to create the motion profile of the robot for every procedure based on where they put the incisions, because the main 4 degrees of freedom, they're pivoting about the abdominal wall. The instruments insert and go out through the incision, they rotate, and they move and bend in 2 degrees of freedom about that incision site. So the incision site really defines the robot's motion for a multi-port surgical procedure. And that adds a ton of training. It also adds a lot of those early procedures, the first 100 procedures that a surgeon performs. They find themselves in the position of choosing the wrong incision sites and having to either struggle through the procedure or make more incisions in their patient, leading to a lot of frustration and abandonment of the technique. So to us, that's what the idea of single incision surgical robots, single port robots is all about. It's not about the idea that 3 to 5 small incisions are really that much worse than 1 small incision. Making the incision small it's a huge difference already. It's about the idea that if you put everything in through 1 incision, all of the robotics, then the robot can work from the inside out. The joints always move together. The surgeon is not creating a robot for every procedure. The robot is just inside of the patient. And we're not the first to think of this. We're just the first to use our decoupled actuator technology to really achieve it. There are existing single port robots. They're just far too small and too weak once they're inside the body. And the smallest incisions that they have are 2.5 centimeters, which is quite large. That leads to 8.4% complication rates. So actually less capability than multi-port robotics with complication rates that are actually starting to approach open surgery again.
So let's drill down into this a little bit, because it's important in terms of the value proposition that you're talking about. So when we talk about open surgery, I think that's clear. Somebody cuts in, there's a lot of complications associated with those incisions, the repair of the incisions and so forth. So you remove all of that with minimally invasive. That's what people typically call keyhole surgery. That's what you're referencing. And when you talk about keyhole, unlike your door, it's like you've got 5 keyholes if you're really doing this, or I'm making that number up. It can be a varied number, but you have multiples and you can have robots involved. And I think what's important out of what you described there is that even if you're going to approach from 5 different locations, you've got to get those 5 approaches, I want to say exactly right. I don't know what the tolerances are, but if you get that approach wrong, it's like drilling in your walls here. If you get it wrong and you're not in the stud, you've got to put another stud in. Is that that's what's going on, even with the robots?
That's exactly it. And, even if you get it right? Even if you're really practiced at doing that gallbladder surgery, you know exactly where to make those incisions, you put them in the right spot. You might find, as happens all the time, that the patient has a hernia in their groin, which is down in the opposite quadrant of the abdomen. And you need to remove your instruments, make new incisions, because you've set up your system to operate in the upper right quadrant. And now you need to operate down in the lower left.
So I that's just extraordinary. I think lots of people are going to pause for a second and go, wait, I thought this whole minimally invasive, one time and we're done and we've got this perfect circumstance. And that's not the case, even with expert hands and, knowledge and insight. Not least of all, I forget what the numbers are. I ought to be able to remember from my anatomy class, but just pure anatomical variation comes into play with this as well. So that's an additional layer. And again, part of potential complications, poorer outcomes. What you're talking about, and I think it's important to understand this, is a single insertion point, but essentially multiple, I don't want to say approaches, but let's call them multiple tool sets. It's like having a Swiss Army knife going in through one port. Is that?
It's both multiple tool sets, but also multiple approach angles. What you were saying was dead on. So one of the challenges with some of the historic single port approaches, not just that incision size. A lot of them are no longer keyhole incisions. They're actually using open technique. But on top of that, they are stuck operating just forward from the incision site. Whereas one of the things that we've developed that we're incredibly proud of is our ability to really flip and face in any direction. And we really believe that by enabling the surgeon to turn around to even work, they can literally flip all the way back and work around the incision site, enabling them. We've designed our system to enable them to do that because we believe that it has incredible potential to offer them the ability to do more things and adapt to more challenges during a procedure.
So we've gone from open to keyhole or minimally invasive to single approach. I think you recognized as, not brand new in terms of its approach, but you've obviously managed to find some success in that. Tell us, what was it that allowed you to be successful? Were there some learning points or some differences in the way that you approached it? How did you make this work?
So it's all about the robotic actuator technology. There have been a number of attempts to replicate success of previous surgical robotics companies by copying their existing technology. In this industry, that is really hard. You need something really disruptive and very different in order to make an impact. And one of the main challenges, it's interesting. There's always this saying in engineering that we'll fix it in software. And as a mechanical engineer, I really believe that you need to fix it in hardware first, and then adapt to any software that you need. So flexible robots that people use for existing single port, they're ironically, they're too flexible. They don't have the force capability, and yet they also don't have, they're too large and don't have the number of joints that you need inside of the body to provide the total motion that we're able to provide. Rigid robots, like what are used in most surgical robotic procedures today, in multi-port procedures, they all have something called coupled motion. So within the robot, when you move one joint, all the other joints distal down toward the tip of the robotic arm also move through their full range of motion because of the way the cables pass through the joints. So what that means is that legacy systems with just a wrist on the end of a stick, they end up needing thick steel control cables in order to drive that wrist. Whereas our system, we've invented and patented and spent many years perfecting decoupled robotic actuators that allow us to remove any connection. So with these legacy systems, with their coupled motion, they've essentially fixed it in software. They have a mechanically coupled system that they then use complex software to move all the control cables in unison to produce motion of just one joint. But that's why they still have that mechanical exponential buildup of force. Whereas we've fixed it in hardware. We've invented the decoupled actuators, and our system has no linking between each of the joints. We have 0.5 millimeter diameter advanced polymer cables driving our system and 9 degrees of freedom per arm. And that's what gives our system so much capability. And then the one other innovation that I'm really proud of is everybody else in not even just surgical robotics, in robotics, focuses on 6 degrees of freedom plus an end effector, 7 total typically. The 6 joints are, in Cartesian and Euler, that's XYZ plus yaw, pitch, roll. It gives you full position and orientation control, but it doesn't give you a choice of how to get there. So what we pretty quickly realized is that humans actually have 2 extra joints. The most obvious for everyone listening, you can hold your hand in one spot and raise your elbow up and down. And that's part of what gives humans such incredible dexterity. If you remove those elbows, like legacy multi-port robots, you're stuck with your arms colliding all the time, which really just goes to show how important port placement, incision placement is for legacy systems and how perfect it needs to be every time. we've recreated those elbows, giving that natural human dexterity the ability to reach around things to address tissue from multiple angles.
So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Today I'm talking to Adam Sachs, the CEO and co-founder of Vicarious Surgical. We are knee-deep in robotics, in robotic actuator technology. That's essentially the muscles, I think, is how I would sort of describe it. We're talking degrees of freedom from 6. I think I heard you say 9 degrees. And I want to go back to something that you talked about, that, just extraordinary idea that you can insert a robot into the abdomen facing, let's say, down to the pelvis. And what I heard you say was you can essentially turn that around and face up towards the head as part of the technology that you've built. And maybe that's one of your degrees of freedom, because visually, my mind's blown. It's exploded. If you could see me on the screen right now. Help me understand that and what's going on there.
Yeah, I'll actually share something that I'm not sure I've shared previously, but the inspiration for that one was the movie The Exorcist. It's the idea that it's superhuman flexibility, and we allow the surgeon to do exactly that, to spin all the way back around and operate back at their own incision site through which the robot was inserted. And that's, as I was mentioning, that is incredibly important, because of course surgeons do not get the incision location that wrong, right? They don't pick the entirely opposite side of the abdomen from where they wanted to operate. They do discover things, as you mentioned, that they didn't expect during the procedure, and suddenly need to operate on the opposite side to repair something or address something, or even just to look at something in detail that they didn't see previously on preoperative imaging or in the patient's history. So all of that's an incredibly important addition to what the surgeon can provide.
Let's be clear, just in one foul swoop, you have wiped out a whole surgical activity of the exploratory abdominal surgery for somebody that has unexplained symptoms, where we have to open up a huge incision and essentially look around. And you've said we can now do that effectively with one small keyhole incision. That's extraordinary. I mean, just that, and I know that's not one of your focus areas, but wow.
I'll say that's the goal. That one, we this is still in design, and I do want to kind of be cautious about making it clear that we are in the final stages of our design and need to take this through the FDA and prove all of that. But that is absolutely part of the goal.
That's just fantastic. I mean, that's such a huge operation. Quite has major impacts for all sorts of reasons, but it's a valuable diagnostic tool, but we don't use it because of all the complications that potentially ensue for something that, is diagnostic in approach. So fantastic. So not a lot of time left, but there's something that's burning inside me now as I think about all of this. I already understand my ineptitude when it comes to this. So I had an experience where my daughter went and she trained on a laparoscopic robotic system to do gallbladders. She literally blew through the 7 or 8 steps in 30 minutes. I couldn't get past step 1. I just didn't have the wiring. She was wired that way. But I think you're at a whole different level. How are you going to train or allow people to operate it? This seems like a really complex area. Or have you thought about that as well?
So we've definitely spent a lot of time on it. Actually, before I address that, I do think it's worth noting that your experience, I breezed over it in the story at the beginning about, what Dr. Green was frustrated with and what he was complaining about. But that was actually one of his biggest complaints, was that, there are surgeons who, they go through all this training like you have. They go through, medical school and then residency. And some of them just still are not naturals at it. They're brilliant. They're dedicated. They care. But laparoscopic surgery it's an incredibly complex technique that takes a level of hand-eye coordination. They may be excellent at operating open and just never got good at that backwards reversed motion that is laparoscopic surgery. And That's part of the value proposition of providing a system that can frankly allow the surgeon to go back and focus on what they're good at again, instead of all of this technique. So of course we spent a lot of time on training, but I guess the point I'm really trying to make here is that the inspiration of what we're trying to do and what we're designing our system to do is to not require all of that training, to just work like the surgeon's own body. Instead of teaching the surgeon to press a clutch pedal and drag the camera around with legacy surgical robots, you move the camera by looking around. You just, you tilt your head and you look. You move your arms by moving around. You can sort of reposition your robot just as if you were sitting in a chair by grabbing and scooching around, like you would if you were in a swivel chair like I'm sitting in now. It's all designed to be much, much easier, much more natural for surgeons to use. And we believe that the training profile will reflect that.
So, I mean, that's just extraordinarily exciting. I mean, I think you'll resonate with lots of clinicians that, it's a different set of techniques to do minimally invasive. You're sort of looking at something else versus at the field, and, that hand-eye coordination is completely defunct. And, we've failed at delivering a system that enables you to sort of work naturally, because that's what we spent our whole lives up to that point, until we did minimally invasive surgery, working in that way. So you've essentially turned the system on its head to create, I want to say, the natural use case for surgery. So in the closing minutes that we have, tell us where this is going and what you're excited about.
So the next steps for our company are to go through the final stages of design. The technology all works. We're going through beta testing right now. In-house, we'll be doing another round of beta testing next year, finalizing and locking our design, and then going through all of the regulatory testing that's necessary for us to prepare and submit our application to the FDA. We're incredibly proud to be the first robotics company to have a breakthrough designation from the FDA, meaning that the agency has reviewed what we're doing in detail, and they believe that we are quite likely to have clinical benefit where nobody else has succeeded. And they're going to provide us a ton of support working with us to make sure our device is safe, effective, and get it to market as quickly as possible. And all of that makes us incredibly excited about the next 2 years. We're also working on building out partnerships with surgeons and hospitals across the US and across the world. Have major hospital chains both in and outside the US that we're working with, that have invested in our company and are devoting time and resources to help us go through these final stages of design to make sure that our device is exactly what they need once it's on market.
I think exciting times. I want to just sort of emphasize a couple of points here before we close out. One, you're looking for sites, test beta sites. You're looking for people. You're actually hiring folks to come in and participate in that. This is right at an inflection point, which for those that don't know, getting de novo status with the FDA is a big, big hill to climb. So kudos to you and for the innovation. I imagine you're going to have other people knocking on your door from other industries and potentially out of this world, possibly, I would imagine, as well. So exciting times. Unfortunately, as usual, we've run out of time. It just remains for me to thank you for joining me on the show, sharing this exciting vision, and looking forward to hearing more about it. Adam, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for making the time.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com, and tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space, by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.